Hey everybody, it's Carm here. You know who? Coming to you on a Sunday afternoon. Was outside earlier doing some yard work, and I was going to do this outside actually, but neighbors doing some work on the house and a lot of sawing and drilling and stuff, so it'd be a little noisy for video. But wanted to come on and talk about a favorite band. Actually, not this particular one. And show a little something for Shannon here, who just did a wonderful video on Genesis. Really nice overview of their studio albums. Wonderful. Highly recommend going and check that out. I'm going to talk about a different favorite band though, which has been with me not quite as long, but probably since right after I got out of high school, in the mid-90s. And that is Oregon. The brand new album just came out, Lantern. This is their, I'm saying here, this is their 30th album, which I didn't even realize after all these years. So really thrilled. It had been about, I think, 5 years since their last one, Family Tree. It was from 2012, and that might have been the longest they've gone between studio albums, as far as I remember. And I'm sure many folks watching this, are familiar with them, as I know a lot of folks in the VC, have enjoyed them over the years. For those not familiar, they were formed around 1970 as an outgrowth of the Paul Winter Consort. Original members, Ralph Towner, classical and 12-string guitar and piano, and later adding other keyboards, as well as always he had played other instruments, French horn and maybe even trumpet and several things, some percussion. Paul McCandless, oboe, English horn, bass clarinet, later various saxophones and flutes, penny whistle, a wonderful distinctive player. Glenn Moore on bass, acoustic bass, and also electric bass and some violin. And the late and much lamented Colin Walcott, who played sitar, tabla, and a variety of other instruments. In fact, most of them also are piano players. I'm not sure about Paul, but they play piano as well as a variety of other instruments, all combined. And throughout the 70s, they had this incredible, unclassifiable sound. I mean, kind of East meets West with jazz, contemporary classical, just so many things thrown into the pot, and it would vary from album to album and even song to song. Incredibly evocative, and from the first time I heard it, the first time I saw them actually in the bins, it was in the New Age section, which is where a lot of groups are relegated if there's that kind of ambiguity as to what to call them. And they continued on evolving throughout the 70s and into the 80s. And in 1984, Colin Walcott, along with their road manager, died in an auto crash. And the other guy in Germany, and I think the road manager and Colin were sitting in the front seat, and I think most of the members of the group were in the back. One of them, I think, had traveled separately, but the two in the front, they were killed sadly. And they did continue on. I think they waited a couple of years before they really started playing together consistently, and they got Trilak Gurtu on percussion, a great Indian percussionist. In fact, I think Colin had said if they ever needed a substitute percussionist, he would have wanted him to, so it was fitting. And they went on with that lineup for several years into the 90s, and then at some point he left, and then they were just a trio for a while. And of course that changed the sound and dynamics to a degree, although still had that very distinctive approach. And somewhere in the mid-90s, they were trying out different percussionists. Mark Walker, who is now since a fellow right here, who since has become their drummer, percussionist ever since then, at least 20 years. And they carried on with that lineup up until I believe about 3 years ago. Glenn on bass had left the group for reasons which I'm still not even sure, and was succeeded by a fellow named Paulino De La Porta. So from Italy, who I hadn't heard of previously to them getting him. Now his approach, if you know Glenn Moore's playing, to me I consider it somewhere between Gary Peacock and Eddie Gomez, maybe. Very much his own style, a very distinctive approach, but those might be two maybe touchstone players that you could refer to. Paulino has I wouldn't say he's necessarily subtler, maybe more of a subdued player, although on repeated listenings I could really hear there are some subtleties, and he has an incredible tone, very beautiful, rich, and just a lot of he does different things on fills when he's playing, aside from the traditional bass lines, but he blends into the group beautifully here. And this is his debut with the group after some years that they hadn't recorded. And it starts with a piece called Dolomiti Dance, which is actually on Ralph's most recent solo album. Showed and talked about this a while back, My Foolish Heart. And this, I don't know what it is about this song, especially the way they play it. You're hearing another version of it. That's another thing too, is on their albums they'll bring back tunes that they had played for years, and as well as Ralph's own compositions, which he's been the chief composer all through the years. But I don't know why this first piece, I tend to think of a bullfighter for some reason. Like I imagine like a bullfighter with I don't know what it's called, like the red cape, but instead of the bull getting more aggressive, he's kind of almost dancing along with him. I just imagine it, because it does have kind of a Spanish tinge to it. The next piece is called Duende, which is more of a ballad, which it sounds like they've done on this album perhaps more than maybe recent previous ones. There seems to be more ballads on here, more kind of wistful, melancholy pieces, which this one certainly seems to be. The next cut is called Walk in the Walk, which is a Mark Walker original, and I don't know if he's written for the group a great deal. Even though Ralph's the chief composer, he's never. I wouldn't say they are a very democratic group. Very much split equally as far as the creative contributions, even though he wrote most of the pieces. But yeah, it's a Mark Walker piece, which is very pretty much kind of a bebop-y kind of tune. More of a traditional jazz quartet feel, which is really kind of what they got a little more into, from like the late 90s and into the 2000s. Again, still having the distinctive group sound, but just got a little bit more in the traditional jazz vein. But you still wouldn't mistake them for, a traditional jazz quartet. Always had that, the different flavor. And the next piece is called Not Forgotten. And very much like the title, again, it has that kind of melancholy, wistful, almost kind of an elegy. Not too sad, but it's definitely slower and more subdued. I really like this next cut. The fifth piece is Hop, Skip, and a Thump. It's not upbeat in an up-tempo way. It's kind of a mid-tempo piece, but it has a really kind of a jaunty, whimsical feel to it. This one, it makes me think of like walking along a cobblestone road somewhere, maybe in a European city, or something similar with like the old street lights, kind of like like an old lantern, and it just has that feel of just kind of walking around this town and just observing things and just really taking in the moment. It sounds like the song really has a sense of we're in the moment, we're just just enjoying the surroundings and the atmosphere. The next piece is absolutely beautiful, Figurine, which is a very short piece, a duet for Paul on English horn and Ralph on piano. Gorgeous, very kind of nocturnal, but it's beautiful and soft, but not too. It's somewhat melancholy, but again, not in like a sad way. It's more of kind of a reflective way, and which I don't know, kind of makes me wonder. I'm hoping this isn't like a swan song type thing, because there are pieces on here that have that feel to it. But it's a very beautiful piece, and again, I think it's possibly the shortest one on here. Now the next one is The Glide, which is one of my all-time favorite pieces of them. All these years I've been listening. I think they played it for the first time on record on Crossing, possibly, which was the last album they made with Colin Walcott in 1984. And this is another one, probably one of the things they've done that's closer to bebop, traditional jazz type thing, but just it has this kind of ascending and descending rhythmic pattern that goes throughout the piece, just up and down and up and down, and whoever's playing lead at the time just wonderfully kind of dances and weaves around it, almost like this, you've got the ascending and descending thing is kind of in the center, and it's just going up and around it. And Paul's solo on here is, whatever he solos on this, on soprano sax, it's always just very fun and bouncy, and just, again, the closest you really hear them playing, almost like traditional jazz, but not in a way that you would hear a lot of other groups do it. And of course, you have Ralph on piano, which if you know his playing, his piano and is just about as distinctive as his guitar, and is wonderful on both. It's always been a great 2-for-1 thing, for that instrumentation. The next piece, Aeolian Tale, is an original by the bass player, Paulino De La Porta, and another one that's rather melancholy and wistful, but you could also really hear, he has a distinctive writing voice as well as his playing, and again, more of his own soloing, which is again a little more subdued than Glenn, but still, very much blends wonderfully with what they do as a whole. Lantern, the title cut, is carries on the tradition they've done since the very beginning, and that's doing collective improvisations as a group. Wonderful interplay. You hear Ralph's more prominent on the synthesizer on here, which he often is on the improvisations. Just again kind of darting and weaving around what the others are doing. Paul plays sounds like penny whistle on here, which isn't credited on the back here, and just wonderfully how they play off each other and get kind of a rhythmic, just a very gradual rhythmic building sort of scenario, and yeah, just it's purely listening, whatever they're hearing each other do, and they've done that again since the beginning. Sometimes it was more abstract in the past, but they still, definitely not resting on their laurels, being all, most of these guys are, well over 60, and, still as creative as ever in that vein. Now the final cut is The Water is Wide, which is, I think, a pretty rare example of them doing a standard or a traditional piece, and this was arranged by Paul McCandless. It's hard to describe how beautiful this version is. He plays bass clarinet on this, and just gives a wonderful kind of down-home feel, I guess you could call it, which is very interesting hearing the group just take on something other than, the last time I remember was very early on. They did a version of Bill Evans' R.E. Person I Knew, but that was at the very beginning. But so yeah, it's refreshing to hear their take on it. And yeah, I recommend this very much. I mean, I've given it several listens, and I know on repeated listenings there'll be a lot more things I think I wish I could have said here, but it'll come to me. But I'd recommend it if if you're a fan, of course, and if you're not familiar with them, if you want to go in reverse chronology as far as getting into the music, you could start right here, and yeah, just soak it up. It's just wonderful to hear them back, and again, I hope they carry on, and with this lineup and wherever they go beyond it. But, yeah, just an all-time favorite group, and yeah, someone more people should know. So rushing just a little bit here because I see looks like my battery indicator is going, but thank you all for watching. Hope you're all well, and from the boys and I, which now they're gone, peace, love, and joy.